Hello, my name is Steph and I'm the Learning Manager here at the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House. We are a building where there are beautiful heritage spaces, but also a place where we explore your voice in our democracy. Now today I'd love to welcome you to the Senate chamber. This was a space from 1927 to 1988 for 61 years where our federal parliament sat and where senators worked, where they debated, where they had lots of discussions to help create laws for all Australians. Now I wonder, as you look around, what are you noticing? Can you see the bright red carpet and the leather seats? Can you see the central table? I'll note that the government would have sat on this side of the chamber and the opposition on this side. Perhaps you're also noticing that there are some very special chairs right there in the middle. We're going to come back to those. You'll see the clock behind me. There are lots of those in this room. And also the press gallery. So an important space where journalists would have sat, where they would have listened in to conversations happening in here so that they could write newspaper articles and make sure to share all of the information that was happening here in the chamber with Australians across the country. But also some other very important seats in here are for the public. We have public galleries where you could come and sit and watch what was happening in the chamber and hear them debating.
Is there a situation in this country that calls for these powers?
Deputy President, with regard also to this matter...
and bring to the notice of the Minister. I would ask the Minister to have a look at a suggestion that I made in the Senate last year in respect to schools.
So here, I wonder what you're noticing on the central table. We've got a bright red telephone. You can also see the Hansard bench. So Hansard is a record of everything that's said in Parliament. And we need a flexible seat so that as rich debate is happening, if it's time for you to go on your break, you slide off the seat and the next person can come and sit straight down so they can keep going with their shorthand. Now, we've got some very special seats also here at the central table. So this is where the leader of the opposition in the Senate would sit, and also the leader of the government in the Senate would sit on the opposite side. So here you can see on the table we've got our order of business. So this is an agenda. It tells everyone what's going to happen for the day here in the chamber so they can prepare. So it gives us an idea of when bills will be debated, and it also helps everyone stay on track. But this particular one, you'll notice, is from 1979, and it's even created using a typewriter. Now on this side of me, we've got some of our seats. You'll notice that they're in pairs, but you may notice if you pop down here, you'll see some very funny looking phones that we have in our chamber. You may have seen one of these at your grandparents' house. We don't often have them in our homes these days, but it allowed the senators to be able to call their office in case they needed important documents brought up to the chamber or they had a question to ask their staff. This is where some of our front benches would have worked. So these are often ministers for the government, and also our back benches in behind there. And you'll see we've got our Hansard records that I just mentioned are set up on the table, but also this is where the clerks would sit. And you can see that we've got a bill ready here on the table to be introduced into the Senate. Now, you may be able to see behind me that we have some very special seats in this chamber. So come on up for a closer look. This seat right at the front here is for the President of the Senate. So you could see that they are overlooking the chamber. Their job is to keep order, to make sure that everybody is following the rules, so that everybody gets a turn to be heard and they're speaking for the right amount of time and being respectful to each other. But you may also notice some other very special chairs in this chamber. So behind our president's chair, this is where the monarch would sit if they were visiting. You can see a crown on the top there. You can see the coat of arms from here. This is where King Charles III would sit if he was visiting Old Parliament House. And what happens is that the president's chair is moved over to the side so that the monarch can come and sit at the table and preside over the Senate. Now, someone else that is very important to our democracy is the Governor-General, and they're the King or Queen's representative here in Australia. So they can also sit in this important chair. Now, they often come in for the opening of Parliament when we have a new session.
Members of the Senate, pray be seated.
So here we have our final chair. This is the consort's chair. So it's where the partner of the monarch would sit. So in 1954, when Queen Elizabeth was here, this is where Prince Philip sat next to her while she was presiding over the chamber. Now there's one more thing that I would like to show you up the front here, and that is the black rod. So important symbol in the House of Representatives, it's the mace, but here we have a black rod, and you can see on the top it's got a crown, a symbol of our connections to Britain, but also the Australian coat of arms is on there as well. So this building was designed by our Commonwealth architect at the time, John Smith Murdoch. And there are lots of really interesting features in the building, and one of them you can see here. So you'll notice these grates on the side that were put in 1927 when the building opened. When John Smith Murdoch was thinking about the comfort of our senators, and a really early innovation was the preparation for air conditioning. So it wasn't yet available here, but he was already starting to put in features for the future of our Parliament House. There were many important senators who worked in this space, but there are two that I'd like to tell you a little bit more about. One of them is our first First Nations senator, Neville Bonner. So he arrived in the Senate in 1971 and he was here for 12 years.
How's it feel now that you're finally elected?
It feels wonderful, I can assure you. The anxiety and everything is over. I know now that I am Senator Bonner, as it were, and it's sort of quite a wonderful feeling.
I want you to take a moment to imagine being the first, being someone who was representing First Nations voices, and what that would have been like to have a seat in this chamber.
Anything pertaining to Aboriginal affairs, I sincerely hope that I will be given the opportunity of making a contribution, and I feel that I can make a very worthwhile contribution. Aboriginal people are entitled to the same opportunities as everybody else. We are entitled to justice under a democratic system, and we will continue to press for those things.
Another senator who is very important to our history is the first woman to work in this space, and that's Dorothy Tagney. She arrived here in 1943 at the same time that Enid Lyons had been elected to the House of Representatives. Now, Dorothy was a very long way from home. She'd come all the way from Western Australia. So imagine being so far from your home and being seated in a chamber where there were lots of other men working, and how you would have felt representing women.
To be elected as Australia's first woman senator is a great responsibility, and also, of course, a very great honour. There is a great deal to be done. We must win the war, and we must win the peace.
Dorothy worked in the Senate for 25 years. That's a really long time.
After having been 25 years in federal parliament, are you leaving with any regrets?
Oh, definitely. I've thoroughly enjoyed the time that I've spent here, but there's so many other things I'd like to see done before I go, leave somebody else to do.
Before her time here, she was a teacher. And so one of the topics that she was very passionate about advocating for was education.
I think the term politics frightens a lot of people. They don't realise that politics is something that affects them every day in their lives. They're affected by politics.
So how do senators get chosen to work in a space like this? Well, here in the Senate, we have equal representation across the states. So that was very important to us when we were federating, because unlike the House of Representatives where it's based on population, in here every state has 12 seats and our territories have 2 seats each. And that was very important for those states who are particularly further away. Now remember, all the way back in 1927, it wasn't as easy to travel across the country as it is now. But our senators, they run a campaign, they then get elected by the people in their state to have a spot in this particular chamber and to take on this role. And here, their terms are for 6 years. And every time we go to an election, half of them get re-elected. So there's a nice swap over where only half are changing out at any time. But I wonder what issues you think are important that you would want to raise if you are a senator. It's a very tough job. They can introduce bills. They're also debating bills which have come from the House of Representatives. Now, before they can be passed into law, those bills have to be agreed on by both chambers in exactly the same form. And then once they're agreed to, they're sent off to the Governor-General for the royal assent and signed off. Another role of senators is that they're often on committees. So sometimes they'll decide that they want more information before they pass a particular bill. And this is an opportunity where they can ask experts questions, where they can bring them in and really talk to them about the impacts that a new law will have on the Australian people. So this is a very important role that you'd be taking on if you were a senator. You can also be a minister and work in the Senate chamber. You don't have to be in the House of Representatives. So a number of our current ministers have seats in this particular chamber. The only role that must be in the House of Representatives is that of the Prime Minister. Their seat is in the other chamber. This is a chamber where everyone is equal. What would a Senate look like in your school? Or if you were creating a space where you wanted to make sure that everyone had their voice heard, what would it look like? Here in the Senate, we get lots of diverse perspectives from our members. And I wonder if you know what issues your senators are passionate about. I encourage you to find out who are your representatives that sit in this chamber and what issues are they bringing to the table. Perhaps you'll find that there's something that's missing from their list, something you would like them to focus on, and you could possibly write to them, send them an email and tell them a little bit more about an issue that you're passionate about. Now that reminds me, I think I have a few emails that I need to go and send. See you later.